In just 19 blistering seconds, the roar of a Stay studio fell right into a suffocating silence. 40 million people watched as Jasmine Crockett slammed an image onto the table. Trump in a stunning white suit at Diddy's white party hand, locked with a person now on the middle of an lively FBI research. His smirk collapsed, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. What occurred that nighttime that might still bring down a former president these days? The cameras woke first. A crane swept over the polished ground like a sluggish hunting bird. The LED wall on the return pulsed with a countdown, every number sparkling just like the tick of a fuse. Every cord, each cable lay in perfect black strains underfoot. The studio became alive in miniature the United States. Journalists jotted remaining 2D notes at the same time as seeking to examine every other's faces. Activists clutched symptoms they weren't presupposed to convey, but smuggled in anyway. Political aides stood rigid in the aisles, rehearsing the spin that they had supply while this turned into throughout. Jasmine Crockett stood within the shadows, simply past the curtain. Her arms rested lightly on a leather folio fingertips, tapping in rhythm with the purple blink of the tally lighting. She became calm but not passive. In her head, she ran the first 30 seconds again, beginning declaration pivot assault. Then she allowed it go, eyes scanning for any detail she should weaponize. Trump was already on the alternative side of the degree, laughing with body of workers. He leaned against his lectern as if it were his living room fire. Whilst a manufacturer brushed his jacket sleeve, he failed to circulate, handiest saved looking at himself within the monitor, smirking like he'd already won. Inside the front row, retired Marines sat beside a church deacon, both leaning ahead. At the back of them, a college student's hoodie study, Justice for All. The frightened buzz within the room broke only whilst a level hand muttered, "White birthday party Hamptons, that guest list." Jasmine did not turn. Her grip at the folio tightened. She just heard the fuse being lit. Her aide's textual content got here via on her watch, all inexperienced for segment. Jasmine replied with a single dot, the private code for standby. The countdown clock hit 30 seconds, and everybody seemed to be respiration the equal air, heavy and electric. George Stephanopoulos stepped forward, adjusting his earpiece. His tone became heat but sharp, the sound of a person used to controlling the pace of a country-wide verbal exchange. Overhead, the applause signal blinked to life. The first cue hit. Royal blue mild washed across the degree. In kitchens and bars across the United States of America, TV volumes clicked up a notch. The subject music stinger rang out, polished and practiced, and the purple digicam light burned consistent. Trump walked ahead on chin high, soaking inside the sound of clapping arms. He glanced left and right like a king greeting his court. The smirk stayed constant. Jasmine stepped into her mark without a phrase. She failed to smile. She failed to nod. She just watched the silence among them, sharp sufficient to cut via the noise. And somewhere in that silence, the phrase's white celebration stored echoing like a fuse quietly burning in the direction of something a long way larger. The heat from the degree lighting clung to the air as the moderator leaned forward, his voice, smooth but sharp, reduced via the low murmur of the studio. First question, immigration policy. Cameras shifted to Trump, already leaning in with the easy swagger of a person who believed the level belonged to him. He launched into his answer like a showman, hand reducing the air tone, growing and dipping like he was playing a crowd at certainly one of his rallies. The us, he declared, can't live to tell the tale if we let people pour in like water via a damaged dam. He became in the direction of Jasmine, pausing for effect and allow a small smirk creep across his face. This congresswoman is too smooth, too naive. She thinks hugs and hope will stop crime. A ripple of laughter rolled via parts of the audience, no longer loud, but enough for the cameras to discover smiling faces. One guy in a crimson tie nodded approvingly even as a girl within the front row bit her lip, uncertain whether or not to clap. Near the lower back, a university scholar in a denim jacket rolled her eyes so hard you can nearly pay attention it. Jasmine failed to rush to talk. She permit the phrases hang long sufficient for Trump to think he'd won. Then she leaned in, gazed consistent. Mr. Trump, information are not tender, and some facts like who you partied with by no means fade. A faint shift rippled through the room, the kind that takes place when people instinctively sit up straighter. Jasmine started out flippantly, nearly conversationally, laying out numbers the crowd wasn't used to listening to from a debate. Level: arrest prices in immigrant neighborhoods lower than the national average. Billions in taxes contributed each year. Hundreds of small corporations built from nothing but grit and sleepless nights. Her phrases pulled the digital camera lens into living rooms and kitchens away from the studio. She described a farm employee's cracked hands loading sparkling produce onto vans sure for American tables. A nurse, as soon as undocumented, now pulling double shifts in an ICU. A soldier immigrant-born buried under the flag he swore to protect. A few within the audience nodded without realizing it. Others crossed their fingers, preserving their floor. The split became visible, almost like a seam walking instantly through the gang. Every Digicam operator knew to seize each aspect's the conviction and the resistance in perfect contrast. Trump shook his head, cutting in. It is very emotional, very sweet, but it's now not sensible. His interruption died while she met his eyes and spoke again. Voice company. Sensible is knowing that fear doesn't make us safe. Fact does. For a moment, the studio was flawlessly nevertheless. No coughing, no shuffling papers, simply the quiet tension of opposing forces, neither willing to step lower back. Even Trump hesitated earlier than leaning back into his chair as though he'd been caught off balance. The moderator cleared his throat, moved to the following question, and the debate rolled on. However, Jasmine's attention turned into already moving. Her hand brushed the side of the bag at her podium, feeling the folder internal, undeniable, unmarked, the sides for an unmarried white decal. A reminder she carried now, not for the cameras, however for herself. Nobody else observed. Not the staffers in the wings, not the manufacturers in the back of the glass. But Jasmine knew what changed into in there, and he or she knew exactly, while it'd depend. In her mind, the idea changed into constant and sure. Tonight isn't always just about coverage, it is about truth. Trump saved Speak Me, satisfied he nonetheless had the upper hand, never understanding the actual fight hadn't even began. The lights seemed hotter now. Or maybe it was just the manner Trump leaned forward, grinning like a man who notioned the sport was already his. He tilted his head, scanning her outfit from head to toe. First-class jacket, he said, voice dripping with mockery. Bet they do not pay you plenty in Congress. Some within the target market chuckled, others frowned, sensing the jab had crossed a line. Trump did not prevent there. To your profession, lovable speeches, however no actual results. His fingers unfold wide like he become addressing a crowd of lots, not the female sitting 6 feet away. Jasmine did not chew lower back right away. She let the silence hold heavy and uncomfortable. You may almost listen the hum of the cameras anticipating her to talk. Trump shifted in his chair, the grin fading simply sufficient to observe. While she in the end leaned ahead, her voice became calm, but the edges had been sharp. If you want to speak about who understands America, allow us to talk approximately the company you preserve. The studio reacted earlier than Trump ought to. A low murmur rippled through the crowd like the first gust before a hurricane. Heads became. The moderator glanced among them, sensing something changed into approximately to snap. Trump blinked, feigning confusion. I have no concept what you are speaking approximately, he stated, but his smile failed to pretty reach his eyes. Jasmine tilted her head, analyzing him like a chess participant before the killing flow. Do not worry, she said softly. We're going to get there. The Hamptons always comes lower back around. Her hands brushed the folder at her side, the one keeping the photograph. Not starting it, but just letting the concept breathe. Trump attempted to snort it off, but it came out thin. He reached for his water, the cameras catching that flicker in his eyes. Then she leaned in again, voice low. You keep in mind the Hamptons, do not you? The white party. And who stood beside you that night time? The words landed like a dropped glass. The reaction was instant whispers, raised eyebrows, even more than one gasp. A person in the third row muttered, oh no, she did not loud sufficient for a mic to seize. For a split second, Trump's face betrayed him. Only a flicker, the jaw tightening, the eyes narrowing before snapping lower back into that public masks. But the cameras stuck it. They constantly do. Jasmine failed to press similarly. Not but, she leaned again, letting the tension breathe. "It is funny," she said, her eyes locked on his. "How an unmarried knight from years in the past can still make the most effective man inside the room balk." The moderator hesitated before shifting on. The gang turned into buzzing now, their attention glued to each twitch and blink. And somewhere, tens of millions of visitors at home leaned toward their displays, replaying that tiny second frame by body. Because now, the question wasn't about policy. It became about something else, something bigger. Why does an unmarried knight from years in the past still make the most powerful guy in the room flinch? Trump's smirk hadn't completely recovered whilst Jasmine leaned in again. Her tone was informal, almost playful, but her gaze pinned him to his chair. "You know, the Hamptons, the white suits, the visitor list you possibly desire you may rewrite." The air inside the studio shifted immediately. Human beings were not just watching anymore. They had been leaning forward, breath held, hungry for anything was coming next. Even the degree lights regarded to burn warmer, like they knew something large became approximately to show up. Jasmine didn't give away the total tale. No longer, but instead, she presented the target audience a taste simply sufficient to stir their interest. "A number of those visitors are not with us anymore," she said, her voice low. "And a few can't guard themselves even though they desired to." Trump tried to reduce her off, straightening in his seat. "Faux news." He barked, his voice louder and sharper than earlier then. The phrases cracked through the microphone, but in place of shutting her down, they simplest made the room lean in nearer. George Stephanopoulos lifted his fingers like a referee flashing an expert smile. "Allows keep on with the troubles," he said lightly though. Below the table, his hands sent a quick sign to the manufacturer. "Stay in this line." In the back of the camera, team of workers scrambled to seize every reaction, each shift in tone. Trump kept talking, repeating faux over and over, his pitch mountaineering with each phrase. It turned into the repetition of a man trying to convince himself. Jasmine sat nevertheless, watching him the manner a poker player watches a tell, anticipating the perfect moment to push again. "I am simply announcing." She commenced sluggish and planned. "The organization you preserve says a lot, approximately the type of chief you are." Her words have been measured, but the challenge in her tone changed into unmistakable. Across the target audience, heads became, whispers buzzed, and a few mouths hung open. George's eyes started to the manipulate room. This changed into gold. The director's voice got here via his earpiece. "Do not pass off this." The debate had stopped being about immigration policy. It was now a conflict over reality photo and secrets too dangerous to name outright. Trump jabbed a finger closer to Jasmine, his face tight. "Your mendacity. You do not know what you are speaking approximately." But his moving posture, the twitch on the corner of his jaw, betrayed something his words could not disguise. The cameras caught it all in brutal, excessive definition. Jasmine permit a faint smile curl at the nook of her lips. "Maybe I don't," she said softly, leaning lower back as though she'd already received. "Or perhaps I realize precisely what I am speaking approximately." The crowd erupted with gasps, uneasy laughter, and murmured speculation. George attempted once more to transport them along, his voice, consistent, however betraying the thrill of stage drama. "All proper permits get again heading in the right direction," he said, however no person inside the room or watching at domestic desired to. Jasmine had most effective given them the fragrance of something larger, and now the hunt for the reality had all started. Miles away from the blinding lighting of the studio, Marcus Coloration Johnson sat, slouched on a leather-based couch in his Brooklyn condominium. The glow from the TV flickered throughout his face, his gold chain catching the mild each time he shifted. As quickly as Jasmine stated the white celebration, he sat upright, his eyes narrowing like a person seeing a ghost from his past. Shay didn't hesitate. He grabbed his smartphone, thumbs shifting fast over the screen. "I was there that night. Name me in case you want me." The message shot via the ether, touched down inside the palms of Jasmine's useful resource like a lifeline dropped within the middle of a storm. Inside the studio, the first industrial wreck hit. The target audience buzzed, some leaning in the direction of each different to whisper theories, others without a doubt looking at Jasmine as though she simply cracked open a safe on Stay TV. The lights dimmed barely, however the tension inside the air didn't fade. It shifted, coiling tighter, equipped to spring. Jasmine's aide slipped between digital camera cables and Degree Palm's smartphone in hand. She leaned all the way down to whisper in Jasmine's ear, her tone urgent however managed. "Shade says he became there. He's equipped to return to you." Jasmine's eyes lit up, now not in wonder, but in recognition. Her shoulders loosened, her spine straightened. That single piece of information was like slipping a new bullet into the chamber. She didn't just have her very own truth anymore. Now she had a witness, one the general public might trust, one that could flip rumor into plain truth. Throughout the level, Trump wasn't smiling anymore. He leaned over the brink of his podium, craning his neck in the direction of a man within the front row, his attorney stone-faced in a military in shape. The two exchanged a look that spoke volumes, the form of appearance you only provide whilst you're making plans damage manipulate earlier than the harm is even finished. The attorney leaned again in his seat, murmuring just loud enough for Trump to listen. Trump's jaw clenched, his fingers drummed at the podium in a constant, tense beat. This wasn't the swagger of a person on top of things. This was the twitch of a person who simply realized the floor under him might deliver manner. Jasmine stayed quiet throughout the smash, sipping from her water bottle, however her thoughts become racing. Shade's text intended the story she'd been protecting back ought to abruptly take an entire new form. It wasn't simply her word in opposition to his anymore. It can come to be a chorus. From the control room, the manufacturers watched each of them like hawks. Every shift in posture, every whisper, each look, it changed into all potential gold for the published. They knew the second the cameras came back, the strength within the room turned into going to explode. And because the ground supervisor counted down from 10, Jasmine's lips curved into the faintest smile. She wasn't simply strolling returned right into a debate. She turned into taking walks into a combat she now knew she ought to win. The pink tally light on the principal digicam blinked wide awake, and the hum of the studio swelled like a typhoon building offshore. The industrial damage was over, but the electricity in the air felt unique, now charged, unpredictable. Trump leaned into his mic with a measured inhale, voice thick with that fake calm he used while seeking to seize manage. Permits communicate approximately the economy, he said, his tone gradual and planned, as if dragging the debate into more secure waters with the aid of sheer pressure of will. But Jasmine failed to pass. Didn't even blink. "We will get to the financial system," she said, every phrase crisp and reducing. "However, first, let's end that night in the Hamptons." It wasn't a request. It became a command cloaked in velvet, and the weight of it made a ripple through the gang. The audience shifted. Backbones straightened, legs uncrossed to 100 pairs of eyes narrowing in unison. On the clicking row, newshounds snapped their interest upward, palms already clattering against keys. Laptops lit the dim corners of the level as tweets began to fly. Crockett confronts Trump on mysterious Hamptons nighttime. Hashtags have been born earlier than Trump may want to even elevate his chin. He compelled a snigger low and brittle. "Greater fake news," he muttered, however the mic betrayed him, catching the dryness in his throat. His eyes betrayed him, too, flicking from Jasmine to the cameras to the front row in which his lawyer sat stiff as stone. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, analyzing him like a chess player, finding out whether or not to make the killing pass now or drag it out. "You already know," she stated, her voice suddenly lighter, almost conversational. "Some human beings from that nighttime aren't right here to guard themselves anymore, and others are equipped to speak." It landed like a gut punch dressed as a whisper. Some target market participants shifted of their seats, leaning ahead simply sufficient to signal they have been hooked. Even through the cruel studio lighting, the first bead of sweat seemed on Trump's temple, glinting in 4K beamed into tens of millions of residing rooms, bars, and airport lounges throughout the U.S. George Stephanopoulos, standing simply off to the facet, gave a subtle hand signal to the digital camera operators near up on Trump's face. Each twitch, every blink, each drop of sweat became part of the theater now. Trump adjusted his tie only a fraction too quickly. "I don't know what you are speak me approximately," he stated, but the self-belief turned into gone. The phrases had been clipped, planned, the kind of cautious that comes when you realize one wrong move can set off the blast. Jasmine failed to relent. She leaned in elbows on the podium, her voice dropping, so the microphones pulled her words closer. "What if the whole United States of America," she said slowly, eyes locked on him, "could see the only photo you have spent years trying to bury?" The oxygen regarded to skinny. A murmur rolled through the target market like a low tide pulling lower back before a wave. Somewhere within the crowd, a reporter's pen froze mid-sentence, and for the first time all night, Donald Trump didn't have a comeback. The silence after Jasmine's query still hung in the air whilst she leaned ahead, her voice clean, but wearing the threshold of a blade. "Allow me paint you a photo." She commenced, her gaze locked on Trump as if she could see instantly through him. "It's the Hamptons." White tents stretching throughout manicured lawns. Champagne towers so tall you had to crane your neck just to look the top. Music spilling into the warm summer air like liquid gold. The audience became leaning in now, the photograph taking form of their minds like a movie reel. Each element sharper than the closing. She didn't rush. Her phrases landed sluggish and planned. There had been movie stars, politicians, athletes, men in crisp white linen who thought the guidelines didn't apply to them. And there you have been in a white healthy so brilliant it can blind you beneath the mild, sitting at a non-public table, far from the group, far from the cameras. She allowed the pause linger the way a director shall we the digicam maintain on a man or woman's face before the twist hits. Trump shifted behind his podium mouth, tightening into a thin line. His palms tapped as soon as twice, 3 instances against the wooden. It became a fearful tick, too small for him to notice, but too obvious for the cameras to miss. Jasmine's voice dropped a notch, making the target audience lean ahead without knowing it. "And that I consider one handshake especially. Among you and a man whose name has been splashed throughout headlines for all the wrong reasons. A man who months later became indicted for money laundering, tax evasion, and worse." She permit the phrases and worse path off just like the echo of a door creaking shut in a dark hallway. Trump cut in right away, his voice booming, nearly desperate. "A setup. It's all a setup. I meet heaps of human beings. I do not know every handshake I've ever had." His phrases came speedy. The type of velocity that got here from seeking to outrun a reminiscence that refused to live buried. The target audience murmured a low rumble of curiosity and doubt. The cameras darted among them, catching the sparkle of something unexpected on Trump's face. No longer anger, no longer even annoyance, but the first shadow of unease. George Stephanopoulos stepped in, his voice, calm, however aimed like a dart. "Mr. Trump," he stated, "do you deny being there?" Trump's eyes flicked closer to George, then in the direction of the front row, in which his lawyer sat, frozen lips pressed right into a cold line. "I do not recollect the specifics," he stated. Eventually, every phrase carefully measured. "However, I can inform you this, it is not anything however political. Theater." Jasmine didn't smash eye touch. She let the instant stretch the weight of his non-solution, settling over the room like thick fog. The studio lighting seemed to burn warmer. Someone inside the target market coughed, and the sound cracked the anxiety just sufficient for humans to recognize they'd been conserving their breath. In that immediately, Jasmine knew she had him precisely in which she desired. The audience wasn't simply watching a debate anymore. They were looking a person once untouchable start to draw back. And she or he wasn't approximately to let him get away. Residing rooms throughout the United States were not simply watching a debate. They were preserving their breath. In Dayton, Ohio, retired Marine Carl leaned ahead in his recliner, knuckles white. His wife Elaine iced over with espresso in hand. "Did she simply say money laundering?" she asked. Carl Handius nodded, eyes locked at the display like a fashionable hearing the enemy's war plan. In Chicago, a Tuesday night Bible examine stopped bloodless. 8 human beings crowded round a small television, plates of cornbread untouched. One woman clutched her rosary. "Lord, give her energy," she whispered, in no way searching, far from Jasmine. In Los Angeles, college students sat on a dorm floor, laptops forgotten. "She's now not just hinting," one said. "She's naming the rattling birthday party." Any other shook his head. That is going to be all over TikTok earlier than the spoils over. In Washington, D.C., veteran journalist April Ryan leaned over her desk earbuds and looking the toes on her screen. She had blanketed scandals, protests, and impeachments. But this changed into extraordinary. There was a fragrance inside the air like the first drop of rain before a storm. Her palms moved rapid at the keyboard. Within seconds, her tweet turned into stay. Jasmine Crockett simply cracked open something huge. This is not over. In beneath a minute, her smartphone buzzed non-forestall as the retweets climbed into the lots. Again on degree, Jasmine felt the temperature inside the room trade. Now not actually, however in that manner a speaker feels while a crowd shifts. She noticed the diffused lean of our bodies closer to her podium. The stillness inside the air between Trump's words. It became momentum, the sort you failed to chase, the type you allow come to you. The debate's managed room noticed, too. Digital camera operators were given silent. Hand alerts stayed tight on Jasmine. Catch. Each blink, every pause. Producers whispered into headsets. "We got a live second. Don't destroy away." Trump's smile became now not the wide, cocky grin he'd worn on the begin. It was tight now, compelled, like a person had told him to appearance comfy. However, his muscular tissues failed to recognize how. He took a sip of water that appeared to evaporate in his mouth. His hands wrapped across the podium's area, now not in command, however in grip. In the meantime, the internet was on fireplace. Hashtags bloomed: white birthday celebration, fact Crockett, and Trump who became there. Instagram Tales performed the clip of Jasmine saying, "The corporation you maintain," on loop. On Reddit, novice detectives were already digging for pics from that Hamptons night time. The outside noise was now louder than the debate itself. Reporters within the press segment weren't simply taking notes. They have been furiously typing tweets, their screens reflecting in their glasses. And Jasmine knew this turned into extra than successful in the polls or a great soundbite. This turned into the start of something that could follow him for the rest of his career. She did not want to push more difficult yet. She simply had to permit the anxiety breathe. The question turned into no longer if she had struck a nerve. It became how deep she became willing to cut and what sort of blood the United States of America changed into equipped to look. The room was already humming from the remaining trade while Jasmine's hand moved to the folder by her podium. No rush, no dramatic flourish, only a easy, deliberate pull like she'd been ready all night for this. She laid a single sheet on the podium, then lifted it with 2 fingers, letting the overhead lighting hit it simply right. It wasn't crystal clean. The photograph became grainy, the sort you'll expect from an old Digicam cell phone. But the shapes had been plain. 2 guys aspect by using aspect, each in white. One unmistakably Donald Trump. The opposite a person the S of a new from headlines. And indictments. The target market reacted before all of us on degree stated a word. A ripple half gasp, one half low murmur rolled through the studio. A few human beings leaned ahead, squinting. Others exchanged quick glances like, "Did I simply see what I think I noticed?" Trump broke first. A quick, sharp snigger too high-pitched to sound natural. That he scoffed, shaking his head. "Seems like something your interns made on Photoshop at some point of lunch." However, the manner he prevented searching immediately at the photograph that instructed its very own story. George Stephanopoulos stepped in, voice calm, but eyes lit with curiosity. "Mr. Trump, are you saying it really is now not you?" Trump kept smiling, however his jaw shifted simply enough for the cameras to trap it. "I'm announcing it's fake information, simple and easy." Jasmine did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply tilted her head, nearly amused, and stated, humorous, because the lights, the angle, even the champagne tower in the historical past, all of them matched the white celebration that year down to the ultimate element. More murmurs. More than one target audience members clapped as soon as, then stopped as if understanding they were not supposed to but. Telephones were out now. Displays lit the crowd as people tried to snap pictures of the image. In houses throughout the United States of America, Human beings had been hitting pause and rewind on their DVRs, zooming in, comparing, screenshotting. By the time the Manipulate Room switched cameras, Twitter became already exploding with side-by-side comparisons from antique Getty images. Trump shifted his weight, gripping the podium a little tighter. "That is desperate," he said, voice low, now measured. "You have got nothing." Jasmine placed the picture again on the podium, but now not inside the folder. She permitted it sit down there in plain sight like bait. Then she regarded instantly into the principal digicam eyes steady and said, "If that became the warm-up, what do you believe you studied the total image shows?" For a second, the studio was useless silent. Then the noise hit a wave of whispers, laughter, disbelief, and somewhere buried beneath the clamor, the sound of one guy's respiratory developing heavier under the spotlight. Jasmine let the silence hang for just a second longer, her eyes locked on the crowd. Then she grew to become barely in the direction of George Stephanopoulos, one hand nonetheless resting on the revealed photo, her voice calm however sharp. "I've a guest who can answer this higher than I ever should." The air inside the studio seemed to pause mid-breath. George froze for a cut-up 2D, actually conscious this became now not inside the script. Inside the managed room, a producer's voice crackled via headsets. "What is she doing?" The audience commenced to murmur, whispers spreading like static earlier than a lightning strike. The camera swept wide, catching Trump glancing in the direction of the backstage area. That acquainted smirk became long gone, changed by using quick darting eyes before he compelled his face returned right into a mask of composure. George in the end nodded and said, "All right, permits, bring them out." The digicam swung toward the entryway. Crew members moved speedy to clear the direction even as some in the target audience leaned forward, craning their necks for a better view. In the managed booth, another producer muttered, "Preserve rolling." "That is rankings gold." Trump attempted to appearance comfy, leaning towards his mic with a smirk. "This have to be interesting," he said, but his hands tapped towards the podium in an impatient, worried rhythm. Jasmine stood nonetheless, eyes constant on the entrance, letting the anticipation build like a drawn boring. A figure appeared inside the doorway, tall, vast-shouldered, strolling with deliberate, consistent steps. The lighting struck the define first, then the face. Gasps and scattered cheers erupted as popularity swept through the room. It became Marcus Shaw Johnson, rapper and activist. The identical guy who at some point of the industrial smash had texted Jasmine's resource. "I used to be there that night. Name me in case you want me." He failed to smile or wave. Just walked forward with the gravity of someone sporting a truth too heavy to maintain hidden. Trump's jaw tightened, a diffused clench that the 4K digital camera didn't pass over. George raised his voice. "Marcus Johnson, have been you at the White Celebration in the Hamptons that 12 months?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Front row," he stated, then grew to become his gaze immediately at Trump. "And that I don't forget exactly who I noticed." The studio appeared to freeze. The hum of whispers stopped. Dozens of telephones lifted into the air to seize the second. Trump laughed, the sound sharp and only a little too loud. "Oh, here we move," he said. However, the chuckle did not mask it. All of us in the room ought to pay attention the moderate strain in his voice, and absolutely everyone may want to see it. The studio doors opened once more. This time the parent changed into smaller, transferring with quiet self-assurance. She wore a easy black get-dressed. Her hair pulled lower back and in her proper hand something no person predicted, a scuffed antique digital camera. George Stephanopoulos' voice carried over the surprising hush. "That is Tasha Inexperienced," he stated. Former occasion staffer on the White birthday celebration. The call did not ring bells for each person, however her presence commanded interest. She did not fidget, didn't look apprehensive. Her eyes stayed constant on Trump. Trump's expression shifted, first confusion, then a pressured grin. In no way heard of her, he said with a musing that did not pretty land, but his gaze dropped to the digital camera she changed into conserving, and for a fraction of a second, his smirk faltered. Tasha stepped to the microphone. Her voice became calm, nearly regular enough to sound rehearsed, but there has been weight below each word. "I labored that birthday celebration," she said. I saw matters I was informed to forget about. And I did not. A ripple ran through the target market, low murmurs moving in seats. Tasha held up the digital camera, turning it so the lighting caught its worn metal edges. I took something that night time, she continued. Something the public's never visible. The control room went into overdrive. Producers barking orders. Zoom in at the digital camera. The crimson tally mild on the primary camera flared, catching each scratch and dent at the relic in her hand. Trump leaned into his mic, voice dripping sarcasm. Oh, here we move. A publicity stunt, in all likelihood a prop. He waved a hand dismissively, however his eyes in no way left the digicam. Tasha's lips curved into the faintest smile. This is not a stunt, Mr. Trump. This is history. She rested the camera lightly at the podium beside her as if setting a loaded weapon within palm's attain. And you understand precisely why the room felt tighter now, air heavier. You should almost pay attention the heartbeat of the nation watching through their monitors. Marcus Shaw Johnson shifted his weight beside Jasmine. Hands crossed, eyes locked on Trump like a person watching a chess opponent run out of moves. Jasmine did not talk. She did not need to. Her silence became a highlight, letting the tension develop, letting the audience's creativeness do the work. George broke in his voice, cautiously neutral, but his eyes glowing with the thrill of live television. Tasha, are you announcing you've got photographic evidence from that night? Sure, she said truly. And I am ready to share it if the truth continues to be welcome here. Trump chuckled once more, this time louder. However, the sound became brittle. Faux information, fabricated rubbish. You humans will believe whatever, however there has been a twitch. In his jaw, the kind you get while you see the first crack in the wall you've been constructing for years. And because the digicam reduced to a close-up of Tasha's hand resting at the vintage digital camera, one notion burned inside the minds of hundreds of thousands looking at home what can be on that roll of film that made the maximum powerful guy within the room appearance. Afraid Tasha failed to rush, she opened her bag with the care of a person defusing a bomb. From inside, she pulled out a sealed envelope, thick, stiff, and heavier than paper must be. The target market leaned in without that means to. She walked towards Jasmine. Their eyes met for only a second. No words, however, the exchange said the whole lot. This is the instant. Jasmine took the envelope, tore it open, after which, with the stableness of someone who knew the sector become approximately to trade, she slid out a sleek, high-resolution photo. Gasps began before the photo even hit the screen. The manipulate room didn't hesitate. 2 seconds later, it stuffed the massive show at the back of them. There it changed into crystal clear. Donald Trump in a white fit hand, clasped with a man the information had plastered on headlines months ago now, sitting in federal custody for money laundering. And over Trump's shoulder, blurred however unmistakable, become Sean Diddy Combs, mid-laugh, holding a glass of champagne. The studio erupted. Some inside the crowd clapped like they had been waiting years for this. Others gasped so loud it echoed into the mics. A person inside the back muttered, "Oh my God," just before a dozen journalists started hammering their phones. Trump's reaction turned into immediate, a strange chuckle, shaking his head. That is ridiculous. This is not anything. I take images with hundreds of people, however his smile failed to suit his eyes, and the camera stuck that too. Jasmine failed to observe him. She let the image live on the screen, striking there, like a court show-off no one could unsee. Tell me, she stated slowly, how many of those human beings are under indictment and how a lot of those events had been saved off the report. The murmurs were given louder. Twitter became already exploding. George Stephanopoulos tried to reduce in, however Jasmine stored going. You called it fake information, she said, eyes nonetheless locked on Trump. However, there is the in shape, the handshake, the employer you kept. Tasha stayed silent at the threshold of the level arms. Crossed, looking all of it. She knew this turned into most effective the opening shot. The real ammunition became still in her possession. Trump opened his mouth, but no words got here. The target market became not searching at him. They were looking at the photograph behind him, dissecting every pixel like a crime scene. And in that moment, the tale stopped being about immigration policy or economics. It became about a single night in the Hamptons and the people who wanted it buried. Jasmine subsequently turned to scan the crowd. If you think this image tells the whole tale, she paused, simply lengthy sufficient for the silence to sting. You have not seen something yet. The camera stuck each second, the pointy consumption of breath from the target market, the flicker in Trump's eyes, and Tasha's faint smile like a person who knew the next webpage could be worse. Due to the fact if this became the nice and cozy up, what could the main act do? Trump leaned ahead like a boxer coming off the ropes. His voice turned into sharp, his words speedy. "That is political theater," he said, jabbing the air toward Jasmine. "You've got a few random occasion worker making up tales. This is pathetic." He failed to forestall there. He grew to become toward the cameras as though addressing the country. That is why the USA's in trouble lies smears and cheap tricks. She's were given nothing actual. His hand chopped the air for emphasis, but the area in his tone betrayed greater than self-assurance. It carried the chew of someone on protection. At the huge screen, a cut-up body regarded. Laura Ingraham threw far-flung feed from a refined Fox information set. She wasted no time. That is a smear marketing campaign. That picture out of context. That so known as witness probably looking for repute in a book deal. Her voice changed into easy exercise meant to reassure Trump's base, looking at domestic. Trump nodded alongside like she changed into studying his thoughts. Exactly. Out of context, he repeated, pointing to Tasha. She's not credible. She's not vital. His words were sharp, but his eyes flicked closer to the picture, nevertheless faintly seen at the display screen, as if it had a gravity he could not break out. Jasmine stayed still, now not blinking, letting him communicate himself into a nook. She did not rush in to counter. She knew the silence became doing its own damage. Tasha failed to balk both. She stood on the threshold of the stage, fingers folded, a quiet presence. That made Trump's attack sense like punches thrown at a shadow. The audience's strength shifted. It wasn't the roar from earlier. It became the sluggish, heavy hum of people taking sides. Some nodded with Trump hands crossed tight. Others leaned ahead towards Jasmine, awaiting her to strike again. Trump's voice grew louder. He pointed at the moderators, then at the group. You already know what this is? It's a setup. She's scared to speak coverage due to the fact she has no plan for America. His pitch cracked slightly on the remaining word. The producers did not reduce away. They knew this changed into gold. Each digital camera perspective stuck the bead of sweat, the twitch of his jaw, the heat constructing under the level lighting. Jasmine ultimately moved. She leaned in the direction of the mic, slow and deliberate. You've got spoken for 2 minutes, she stated, her tone even almost gentle. And, in all that point, you have not denied what's in the picture. The room reacted right away, a ripple of murmurs, a few muffled laughs. Trump's mouth opened, but Jasmine became already searching again on the moderator. We are able to talk policy. We will communicate coverage, however the American people deserve answers, and yelling at me may not trade what's on that display. She failed to improve her voice. She didn't need to. The calmness changed into its personal weapon. Trump shook his head, smirking for the cameras, however the smirk failed to stick. The picture behind him was nevertheless there, unmoving, unblinking. And for the primary time all night, it felt like he turned into the only on trial. Inside mints of the photograph flashing at the debate stage, the internet exploded. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, each feed flooded with stills and clips. White birthday celebration witness blasted to #1 on the trending listing. Mountain climbing so speedy it pushed breaking news about a typhoon right down to second region. Some customers slowed the photos, zooming in on Trump's face the instant the photo seemed. Others layered it with dramatic tune, making mini trailers that looked like they belonged before a political mystery. Every loop, each repost, every meme made the instant experience bigger than the debate itself. In a diner off a motorway in Ohio, a middle-aged trucker stared at the muted TV. Fork frozen halfway to his mouth, he muttered, "If that's actual, he has been lying for years." Cubicles over an elderly couple kept ingesting in silence, eyes locked at the display screen. Heaps of miles away in a Miami co-running space, a younger businesswoman shook her head. She's just seeking to embarrass him earlier than the election, she instructed a nearby reporter, slightly looking up from her computer. For her, it wasn't proof it turned into politics. The split wasn't neat. It ran jagged through buddy groups, families, and workplace break rooms. Anywhere, people were either leaning in or turning away. No center floor in sight. Cable information jumped on it immediately. Networks rolled the clip and breakup display screened the talk on one side, talking heads boxed in on the opposite. On the bottom ticker, picture proof stuns debate degree and witness credibility underneath hearth. A few anchors leaned ahead, eyes huge, voices low like they had been unwrapping a secret in real time. Others smiled like they had already determined it became a hoax. However, the image stayed on the screen either way, its presence not possible to disregard. In Jasmine's marketing campaign battle room, each cell phone buzzed non-prevent. Her team was crammed round a long table monitors, lighting fixtures their faces in bloodless blue. Notifications rolled in quicker than they might study them. Lena, her marketing campaign supervisor, slammed her laptop close. "That is the instant," she said. "Drop the final piece now before they bury it in spin." Throughout from her, Malik shook his head slowly. "No, we hold it. Let him sweat. Permit the press pull at each thread." The argument wasn't just about timing. It became approximately survival. Drop it now. And that they risked a counter-punch earlier than the tail took root. Wait too long and the push may want to fade. In the meantime, Trump's team moved fast. They blasted out statements calling Jasmine a desperate flesh presser and Tasha a low-level party worker searching for attention. Surrogates flooded each fundamental community, hammering the equal talking factors in synchronized sound bites. But while they spoke, the picture saved doping up in the back of them on the big screen. It hung there like an uninvited guest they couldn't push out the door. The extra they tried to deny it, the extra human beings desired to see it once more. Returned in her in suite, Jasmine scrolled through stay reactions. One tweet stuck her eye. "If she's got extra, he should be worried." She set her cell phone down, staring out on the metropolis lighting fixtures already weighing her next flow. Somewhere out there, journalists were dialing vintage contacts, chasing whispers about guest lists and personal offers. Podcasters have been planning emergency episodes. Even late nighttime comedians had been sprucing their monologues. It wasn't only a picture anymore. It changed into a typhoon spinning bigger every hour, and Jasmine knew the attention of it changed into approximately to transport right over her. The debate corridor turned into nevertheless humming from the photo when Jasmine leaned in the direction of the mic. Her voice became calm, measured like she turned into about to permit the target audience in on a secret supposed only for them. "It wasn't only a handshake," she said. "There has been a deal." The words landed tough. At the start, it changed into only a faint ripple, but it spread rapid through the room. Fuel got here from the front row, a shuffle of toes from the again. Trump's eyes narrowed, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered throughout his face earlier than the exercise smile back, just a little too short. He laughed, but the sound was hollow. "A deal? It is ridiculous. Completely made up." He waved her off like a heckler, however his tone didn't fit the gesture. Jasmine failed to blink. She allowed the silence stretch just lengthy enough for him to experience it, then introduced, "What if I informed you? There may be a paper path that got him." His hand at the podium twitched slightly, however sufficient for the middle camera to zoom in. The audience leaned ahead. Phones went up, thumbs tapping furiously as people whispered into stay streams. Within the control room, a producer mouthed, "Stay in this," and every lens locked on them. Trump tried to pivot return to gas prices and immigration, however the phrases landed skinny like air leaking from a balloon. Jasmine kept circling, by no means letting him get a long way from that night. "Humans overlook cameras were not the simplest thing at that birthday party," she said, her head tilting barely. "There were contracts, signatures, things that do not simply vanish." Backstage, Tasha watched from the wings, her vintage digital camera resting on her lap like a loaded weapon. She knew exactly what Jasmine became doing. Tightening the net, drawing Trump in addition in. On social media, clips of the exchange had been already spliced with slow-motion replays of Trump's tiny freeze while the word deal becomes spoken. Hashtags multiplied. Deal or no deal. Hampton's handshake paper trail. Trump's jaw clenched. I've in no way visible anything like what you're talking approximately. You're making up fairy stories. The bluster changed into nevertheless there. However, the edge in his voice became sharper now, almost pleading under the floor. Jasmine allowed herself a small, nearly invisible smile. She did not push similarly, but, however, became to stand the digital camera at once. What if she set her tone low and planned, the paper trail leads directly to him? The room went lifeless quiet. Even the photographers appeared to hold their breath. Somewhere in the United States, people at domestic leaned towards their screens, expecting anything got here subsequent. The tension inside the hall felt like it may snap. Jasmine reached down, pulled out a slim manila folder, and set it on the podium with deliberate care. Her palms lingered for a second on the clasp, eyes constant on Trump. You need fairy tales, she stated softly. Allows try a little nonfiction. She opened the folder and slid out a single sheet, black and white edges, slightly worn the FBI watermark, faint but unmistakable. It turned into a photocopy of an agreement blown up on the big display at the back of her. Two signatures sat aspect by way of aspect Donald J. Trump and the indicted businessman Shell Agency. For a cut-up second, the room went silent. Then got hear the sound, first some gasps, then a rising murmur that swelled into something near a roar. Reporter hands clattered on keyboards. A person in the second one row whispered, "Oh my God," into his smartphone. Trump shifted his weight, a tight grin, pulling at his mouth. This is not anything. Absolutely faux, he snapped. But his voice pitched higher than earlier than. He jabbed a finger in the direction of the report. Photoshop, deepfake, something they're calling it now. Jasmine didn't have a look at him. She pointed at the date, typed neatly on the top, August 14th, 2015. The precise night of the white celebration, she said, letting the words hang. The audience caught it instantly, voices rising again. The digital camera stuck each element. The way Trump's shoulders stiffened, the glint in his eyes when he glanced at the display screen. George Stephanopoulos leaned forward, his tone deceptively informal. Mr. Trump, are you announcing this contract from FBI documents is fabricated? Trump hesitated, then released into a rambling solution approximately which hunts and pretend investigations. However, the rhythm turned into long gone. Each sentence appeared like he become chasing his personal words, looking to get in advance of them. Jasmine waited for him to run out of breath. Then she leaned in, voice low but sporting. The issue about paper trails, she stated, is that they do not care how loud you yell. Ink doesn't lie. Phones lit up across the room. Human beings snapping pics of the display screen. On Twitter, the contract become already trending. In residing rooms throughout the United States, households sat ahead on couches, rewinding DVRs just to stare on the signatures once more. Trump attempted to giggle it off, however it landed flat like a punchline. No one understood. He reached for his water hand, shaking simply enough to be noticed. Jasmine did not gloat. She simply stood there, the contract nevertheless sparkling behind her like a shadow he couldn't step out of. And for the primary time that night time, it felt just like the crowd wasn't wondering if she had extra. They had been thinking simply how horrific it may get. Trump leaned towards the mic, looking to barrel over Jasmine's words before they may sink in. His tone changed into sharp sentences, snapping like thrown darts. However, there was something inside the edge of his voice, a faint tremor, like a rope under an excessive amount of strain. He driven more difficult, louder, as if quantity could rewrite the fact glowing behind him. The big display screen loomed over each of them. The FBI settlement blown up in unforgiving high decision. Each letter was crisp. Every curve of ink from the pen matched the manner he had signed his call for many years. There was nowhere for the eye to break out. After which mid-sentence it came about. His throat stuck a crack in the sound. It changed into diffused, however it cut via the room just like the first pop of a breaking glass. Stephanopoulos did not waste the moment. He leaned forward, tone stripped of all filler. Mr. Trump, He said his words sluggish, planned, and heavy. "Is this your signature?" It landed like a punch. The studio air thickened instantly as if every molecule had stopped to pay attention. Even the low hum of the digicam seemed to vanish. Trump froze the query, putting there like a suspended blade. His gaze didn't fall on the paper. As an alternative, it darted to the front row closer to his attorney, who sat inflexible, eyes forward, jaw tight. For the briefest second, it was as if he was looking for a sign. His lips parted, closed, parted once more. But not anything got here. Jasmine didn't blink. She allowed the silence stretch every second, wrapping tighter around him. The target market was leaning ahead next, craning, watching for an unmarried word that might save or damn him. The contract on the large screen seemed to develop larger with the pause, the signature in black ink, nearly pulsing under the new studio lights. Somewhere within the gallery, a cough cut via the tension. Sooner or later, Trump cleared his throat, forced fun that landed flat. "It is ridiculous," he stated, waving one hand. Anyone could faux that, but the timing changed into off. The pause had already been seen, felt, and burned into memory. Journalists within the press row had been typing furiously, some already drafting headlines. Trump hesitates on settlement question on Twitter. The pause become clipped, slowed down, looped and captioned in ambitious crimson text. Jasmine tilted her head, eyes in no way leaving him. "You had your chance to say no," she said, voice soft, but cutting. It wasn't a shout, it turned into a quiet verdict. Trump attempted to get better. For pivoting to witch hunt talking factors. But the room's middle of gravity had shifted. His words now not owned the air. Every digicam stayed tight on his face, capturing each twitch, each forced smile, every tiny break inside the armor. From the managed booth, producers whispered to every different, "Hold it near. Do not cut away." They knew they were not just filming an interview. They were documenting a second that could define the night. And underneath the blinding lighting, the person who as soon as ruled each level searched for the first time like a person status in the shadow of his very own signature. Within the studio, the air changed into so still it felt like it could break. Trump's hesitation hung there, suspended like a glass decoration. One wrong move should shatter. The lighting burned white hot, catching the shine of sweat on his temple. But the real story turned into already spilling a long way past the one's walls. In a small metropolis VFW corridor in Ohio, veterans sat shoulder to shoulder, beers forgotten on the table. One guy leaned forward, eyes locked on the television. That is not a denial," he muttered, his voice low sufficient to make the others lean in. The more youthful vet beside him shook his head, muttering, "I have seen that appearance earlier than a person folds." In Detroit, a single mom had been folding laundry with the news on within the historical past. When Stephanopoulos requested approximately the signature, she stopped mid-fold. The blouse slipped from her palms as she whispered, "Lord." He looks cornered, as if announcing it any louder might smash the spell. Her teenage son peeked around the entrance, drawn in by means of the tone in her voice. On a university campus in California, college students crowded into a dorm living room. Phones lit the dim room, each one recording the stay broadcast. Laughter mixed with disbelief. "He is sweating," one stated, pointing at the display. "He is in no way that quiet." Another shook her head and spoke back, "This is no longer silence. It's panic." Returned in the studio, Trump tried to regain manage, his voice growing only a little too speedy. His fingers drummed on the desk, sharp and impatient. Jasmine stood still, her silence pulling more eyes towards her than any outburst may want to. Each second she failed to speak made his words sound smaller. In a church basement in Georgia, a Bible examine organization had become their folding chairs in the direction of the television. The pastor shook his head slowly, lips tight. "Reality's a stubborn component," he stated, not searching far away from the display screen. A female within the front row crossed her arms and whispered, "It's catching as much as him." Social media became a typhoon. The hashtag White Party Settlement shot into trending popularity in beneath 5 minutes. Items of Trump's frozen face looped with no end in sight, facet by a side with zoomed-in pictures of the settlement, his signature circled in vivid red. Comment threads was battlegrounds. Loyalists protecting, critics piling on, and the unsure asking the same query. What if it is real? In a packed sports bar in Chicago, the game turned into Gone from the monitors. People stood shoulder to shoulder. The Sooner roar replaced by means of demanding quiet. If this is what they are showing, stay, one guy muttered, leaving the idea unfinished. His buddy nodded slowly, his beer untouched. In dwelling rooms, kitchens, rec rooms throughout the United States of America, people leaned towards their displays, subconsciously, like leaning in would possibly assist them trap something the relaxation of the world could omit. The producers within the manipulate room knew they'd lightning in a bottle. Every cut turned into deliberate close US on Trump's jaw, on Jasmine's constant stare, on the glowing contract. Behind them, the country wasn't just looking. They were conserving their breath. And someplace in that collective silence, an unmarried idea commenced to develop. If this may occur within the open, what becomes still hiding within the dark? The clip failed to simply land. It detonated. Inside minutes, it turned into on every foremost community. The Charon screaming in formidable, Trump silent on settlement query. The replay looped forever and ever, Trump's jaw tightening the camera, zooming in on his signature, and Jasmine holding her gaze constant, like she'd been looking ahead to that exact second her whole life. In newsrooms from New York to L.A., manufacturers barked orders to keep it on air. Anchors leaned forward in their chairs, speaking with that measured urgency reserved for political earthquakes. Political analysts drew circles on digital whiteboards, mapping connections among the white birthday celebration, the indicted businessman, and Trump's enterprise history. On Fox, his defenders attempted to mount a counterattack. Laura Ingram's face became tight, her voice sharp as she referred to as it a desperate stunt, but the hesitation in her tone became unmistakable. Even she couldn't absolutely wave away the weight of the evidence on screen. In her Mar-a-Lago, the temper changed into grim. Aides shuffled around the room, voices low like human beings tiptoeing through a criminal offense scene. One muttered, "We need to get ahead of this," but another shot returned, "It is already ahead, people." Telephones buzzed in the West Wing of Trump's political operation, but his legal crew stayed locked in a closed-door assembly. No press release, no fiery denial, best silence. And in politics, silence may be louder than any speech. Jasmine's very own telephone lit up in a steady rhythm. Messages from community leaders stacked one after another. Civil rights activists, church pastors, nearby officials. "You spoke for us this night. You showed them we are now not afraid." One textual content from a Vietnam veteran study, been ready 50 years for a person to face that tall. In a union hall in Pittsburgh, a group of metallic employees crowded around a PC. The clip played for the 5th time. And every pause, each beat of Trump's hesitation became met with murmurs. "He's by no means gave the look of that earlier than," one man said. Any other nodded, adding, "She did not just beat him. She made him look small." Throughout the USA, residing rooms became miniature newsrooms. Households watched with popcorn bowls in hand, switching between channels, texting pals, arguing, cheering, debating. Even in quiet corners, a rural diner in Kansas, a barber save in Atlanta, humans leaned over counters to look at the replay on a person's phone. Twitter and TikTok caught hearth. Contract Gate and Jasmine and Trump exploded into the top trending spots. Clips have been edited with dramatic music subtitles and blazing yellow gradual motion zooms on Trump's face. Overdue night comedians were given in on it inside hours. Jimmy Kimmel referred to as it the pause heard round the world, and Stephen Colbert quipped, "Seems the only element Trump may not talk over is his personal signature on an FBI report." The target audience roared, however below the laughter was that electric-powered feel that records had just shifted. Behind the curtain, Jasmine finally sat alone for a moment. The noise of the gang faded into the historical past hum of her own heartbeat. Her arms rested loosely in her lap, but her eyes stayed sharp. There has been no mistaking it. The nighttime struggle had been gained, however the war was a ways from over. Her aide's knock turned into soft but urgent. They stepped interior, cell phone in hand. "You're going viral," they said, voice trembling among awe and warning. Jasmine glanced on the display. Millions of views, already remarks pouring in by way of the second one. She failed to smile. She did not rejoice. She just leaned lower back barely and whispered to herself, accurate. Let them all watch, because each supporter changed into looking, and so was every enemy. And in the international, she lived in both might be just as risky. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time all night the roar of the studio changed into long gone. Jasmine sat in front of the reflect, the brilliant bulbs nonetheless blazing, casting her mirrored image in sharp comfort. Her matched jacket turned into nonetheless flawlessly pressed, however the adrenaline turned into beginning to fade, leaving the burden of what had simply took place urgent towards her chest. She leaned ahead, elbows on the dressing table, eyes locked on her very own within the reflect. This wasn't just any other political combat. This turned into the type of night that would give up careers or ignite moves. Her mind drifted backward, unspooling moments like an vintage film reel. She noticed herself years ago status in a cramped community middle, arguing for a young mom's right to hold her home. She remembered going down a row of stone-confronted metropolis officials who had already decided the case earlier than she even opened her mouth. She should almost feel the sting of these early defeats, the manner they fashioned her voice into something sharper, harder to disregard. The memory shifted to her first rally reign, coming down in sheets, her voice slightly carrying over the group. Back then, there were no cameras, no trending hashtags, no viral clips, just a conviction that reality become really worth speak me, although it cost her the entirety. Her father's voice came to her, then calm but company, telling her, "Child, they will strive to speak over you. Don't let them. Lead them to listen." This night, that voice had been in her ear every time Trump attempted to drown her out. She set free a gradual breath, the reflect fogging for a moment. This night wasn't just about exposing one guy's secrets. It became approximately proving that strength can be challenged in simple sight. The fact once spoken had a manner of slicing through noise, slicing straight to the center. Her phone buzzed on the table screen, lighting up with dozens of new messages. One stood out as textual content from a lady in Detroit she'd in no way met. "You made me accept as true within status up once more." Jasmine smiled faintly, a grin carrying each exhaustion and remedy. She wasn't naive. The typhoon become handiest starting, and the ward-off might be brutal. But storms had been nothing new to her. She knew the way to plant her feet whilst the wind attempted to knock her down, the way to preserve her head high when the sky grew to become black. She grew to become off the replicate lighting fixtures, letting the room fall into a softer glow. One last deep breath, and she stood accomplishing for the door. Out there has been the subsequent conflict. In right here, only for a moment, she allowed herself to sense the victory. The red tally mild blinked back to life, and the studio air felt electric. Jasmine sat tall, hands folded at the desk, the weight of the evening's revelations, putting within the silence earlier than she spoke. Her voice came low, at the beginning, regular and deliberate, as though she wanted each word to hit bone. "Power without duty," she stated, pausing just lengthy enough for the phrases to settle, "is a risk to each American." The cameras stayed locked on her face. She didn't take a look at Trump, failed to look toward the host. Her gaze changed into aimed squarely at the hundreds of thousands of people looking at domestic. It doesn't remember in case you voted for me or towards me. It does not remember if we agree on taxes or schools. If we start letting the effective lie via an exceptional set of rules, the rest folks forestall dwelling in a democracy. Her tone sharpened on that remaining word like a door slamming close. In living rooms throughout the US of A, people leaned in without figuring out it. Jasmine permit the silence breathe, then leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing simply sufficient to sense non-public. "If we stay silent while we recognize the reality," she stated, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "whose side are we really on?" The query did not call for a solution. It planted itself within the gut-heavy and uncomfortable. Trump shifted in his seat, however the cameras were not on him anymore. The host attempted to move on, but the moment had already taken preserve, stretching past the studio partitions. Jasmine glanced in brief at the target audience, catching the mix of all delight and the quiet recognition that they'd just witnessed something historical. The applause started softly, then swelled until it filled every corner of the room. She rose from her chair slowly, intentionally, the manner a fighter does after going all 12 rounds, and understanding she left nothing undone. The lighting observed her as she stepped off the degree, past the cameras, past the frantic producers whispering into headsets. Her head turned into high, her shoulders rectangular. The applause did not fade. It accompanied her, spilling into the hallway, echoing in opposition to the partitions like the sound of a promise saved. The remaining shot lingered on her silhouette as she pushed open the studio doorways and disappeared into the night. Out there turned into the following warfare. In Right Here, she had simply reminded the us what it seemed like while someone refused to balk. Now and again, the finest power isn't in talking the loudest, but in daring to talk the truth while the whole room wants you silent. In existence, there will constantly come a second when you should pick between protection and reality. And that moment will define who you are. When it is your turn, will you live quiet or will you stand? If this story moved,